Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Abrar Thabit. I'm a doctor of pharmacy. I'm an associate professor of infectious diseases pharmacotherapy at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah. I'm also a consultant infectious diseases pharmacist. In this presentation, I'm going to show you how to find the suitable journal for publication. So by the end of this presentation, you should be able to explain the factors that help in journal selection, understand how to use journal finding search engines, list the documents needed for manuscript submission. So first of all, when you open a journal's website, first I'm going to show you how to search for the journals, but then when you open a journal's website, there are certain items that you have to look for when you open a journal's website. These include the aim and scope, the impact factor, instructions for authors, and finally the indexing. What do aim and scope mean? Aim is what the journal is trying to accomplish. It's basically the goal of the journal. On the other hand, scope is how the journal will accomplish the aim. Typically, many journals list the types or the research field that are covered by the journal. So what kind of research they publish? Do they publish in vivo studies, in vitro studies, clinical studies? Do they publish in certain areas but not in other? So you have to always, whenever you find a journal, you have to carefully read the aim and scope to avoid the risk of having your submitted manuscript rejected initially by the editor. The next thing is the impact factor, which is a very common term that we always hear in the literature area. So the impact factor is basically a measure of how many times an article in a journal has been cited in a particular year. The goal of the impact factor is to measure the importance or the rank of a journal in a certain specialty or category by calculating the time its articles are cited. So for example, in the field or the specialty of internal medicine, there are hundreds of journals, but then they are ranked based on their impact factors. So how is the impact factor calculated? So as I mentioned, basically we have a certain numbers of articles that were published in Journal X, and let's say in year 2019. And these journals were cited 854 times. The total number of articles that were published in this journal in this year was 175. So we're going to call the first number the number of citations of the total number of citations of all the articles published in the journal as A. And then we're going to call the total number of the articles published as B. So we're going to divide the number of the citations by the number of the articles published by this journal, and then we're going to get about 4.88. The higher the impact factor means the stronger the journal, meaning that they are actually publishing impactful articles, publishing articles that are highly cited in other articles and in other researches. Next, another part that we have to look for in a journal's website is instructions for authors. Sometimes in some journals, it can come as the guide for authors or author guidelines, submission guidelines, and so forth. So what do instructions for author contain? They basically include the article types. So for example, the journal publishes original articles, short articles, or sometimes they're called brief communication, review articles, letters to the editor, perspective. Some articles specify that they publish case reports or that they do not actually publish case reports. Some articles, they mention that they don't publish review articles, but rather they publish systematic reviews. So you always have to make sure that the type of manuscript you're trying to submit is actually among the articles that the journal would accept. They also list instructions for manuscript preparation. For example, they should include how the abstract should be structured or perhaps unstructured. What is the text word limit? How many words should be there in the abstract, in the text? How you should structure your text, the number of keywords, the heading style, how to prepare the tables and your figures, and as well as the referencing style. Some journals, they also have a conflict of interest form that you have to fill in. as well as the charges for some of the journals that charge fees. They will tell you also how much they would charge for open access. And then finally, some journals have this extra feature, which is the submission checklist, which makes your life much easier when you go through it before you submit your manuscript and all your documents. Lastly is indexing. And what do we mean by indexing? Indexing basically is where the journal is actually indexed or included in which databases. So it is basically the databases in which the journal is indexed. Okay, so there are many databases out there, but there are some of them are very important. Why is it important to learn about the indexing of a journal? It helps ensure the popularity of your published article, ease of finding it by other researchers, and hence citing it in their work. So the more that your journal that you are selecting is indexed in more databases, or at least the most popular databases, then you can make sure that other researchers who use those databases will find your study, and then they would cite it in their work. So the most important databases, especially speaking about the medical literature, is the PubMed Medline, also the Web of Science, Scopus, and Embase. So these are the four major databases in which medical researchers actually often look for articles or do their search in order to find relevant articles to cite in their work. So now we're going to move and check some sample journal websites. Okay, let's take a look at some of the journal's website. We're going to start with this one from Elsevier. So as you can see here, they have the about the journal. And about the journal, you can see that they have a specific page for the aim and scope, a specific page for abstracting and indexing to see which databases actually index this journal. And also you can see sample of the articles in this journal when you go to the first page. Also, you can find the impact factor just in here. If you want to check the guide for authors or the instructions for authors, you're just going to have to click on guide for authors to take you to the page where you can see or find the instructions for the author. Now let's take a look at another journal. This is the European Journal of Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Disease, published by Springer. Again, you will find a link for the aim and scope, and then you can find here the submission guidelines, also known as the instructions for authors. They have the important information about the impact factor, and then the indexing can be found at the bottom of the page. Another journal. This one here is published by Wiley. You can see the journal overview, and then in the about you can see when you go to overview you're going to find the information about the aim and scope of the journal, and as well as the abstracting and indexing information. When you go to contribute, this is where you can find the information about the instructions for authors and so forth. We're going to go to another journal. We have this one, the Journal of Pharmacy Practice. Again, you can find here the information about the journal indexing. You can also find the aim and scope right here, the submission guidelines, as well as sample of previous published articles. Now moving on to learn about the journal finding search engines. Some publishers have created search engines to make finding the suitable journal for your manuscript much easier. However, this limits your options to only the journals published by this publisher. So you may want to think, okay, so what about the journals published by other publishers? Well, in this case, the way that I actually tend to do it is to see which articles that I cited in my manuscript and see which journals were these articles published. And then I would consider these journals as potential journals in which I would like to publish my work. So let's take a look at some of the journal finding search engines. The first one was actually developed by Web of Science, and it's called Web of Science Manuscript Matcher. It's mjl.clarivate.com. MJL stands for Master Journal List. Here you will find only the journals that are indexed by Web of Science. And usually the journals that are indexed by Web of Science are very strong journals, journals that are very impactful, because Web of Science are very selective when they look for, when they index the journals in their databases. Next, we have Elsevier Journal Finder, Springer Journal Suggester, and Wiley Journal Finder. The last three are actually developed by their publishers, so you will only find journals that are published by these respective publishers. So let's take each website separately and take a look at it. So we're going to start with the Web of Science manuscript matcher. You will see this window basically where they will ask you for, actually for all of them, they're going to ask you for the title and the abstract. We're going to do a demo of using this website in a moment. Then we have the Elsevier Journal Finder. This is basically how the page looks like. Again, it's going to ask you for the title and the abstract. And optionally, you can add the keywords and specify the field of search. Then we have the Springer Journal Suggester, which again asks for the manuscript title. It says that you may want to mention the manuscript test, but you can actually be sufficient with the abstract. And then you can also select the subject area. Lastly, we have the Wiley Journal Finder, which again asks for the same type of information, the manuscript title, as well as the abstract. So what do we need in order to use these search engines? As we just noticed, you'll need your research title as well as the abstract. So how do I read the results and select the journal? So the results will include four main parts. The first one is the match score, or the degree of relevance. And then we have the time to first decision, the acceptance rate, and finally, whether the journal is an open access or not. So let's define each of these terms. First of all is the match score. So match score, or in some search engines, it's going to list it as a degree of relevance. It's basically to what degree the content of your title and abstract match the aim and scope of the journal. Next, we have the time to first decision. This gives you the time in days or perhaps in weeks from the time that you submit your article or you submit your manuscript until you receive the final editor's decision. Next, we have the acceptance rate, is basically the percentage of papers accepted out of all the papers submitted. Usually this number is based off the statistics of the last year, of the previous year. So for example, if one journal received 1,000 papers in certain years, but only 250 of these papers were accepted and published, this means that the journal has an acceptance rate of 25%. In other words, there is a rejection rate of 75%. Lastly is the open access. So basically, this tells you if the articles are fully available without the need for payment or subscription. That's what open access means. Journals can be either fully open access or hybrid. Hybrid means that they can publish their articles as open access or based on subscription. So only, for example, institutions that have subscription with this publisher, the students or the faculty members of this institution can have access to these articles. This is what's called the subscription journals. And so if you want to publish your work as an open access, you would have to pay fees upon acceptance of your paper. So they're usually actually in the ranges of 1,000. 1,000 is actually quite cheap. These days, it can actually reach $2,000 or $3,000. But sometimes, if your work was not funded and the journal is solely open access, you can ask the journal for a waiver or a discount. In other words, in some cases, the journals don't have an open access fees that is like in thousands of dollars, but they may require page charges when the articles, where the articles become open access after certain period of embargo or like after certain months after publication. So usually the page charges can be within tens to hundreds of dollars. So depending on how many pages your manuscript will be published in. So for example, it will be published in 3 pages, and each page costs about $100, then you would have to pay $300. That doesn't make your article completely open access immediately after publication. However, after a certain period of time, some journals, for example, take about 6 months, and after 6 months, your article will be fully available. Now let's do a demo of using the journal finding websites. So now let's do a tutorial on how to use the journal search engines. We're going to start with the master journal list of the Web of Science, that is at mjl.clarivate.com. As you can see here, I have logged in, so you can create your free account in order to use this service. So from the home page, you see this button right here, which says Match Manuscript. So you're going to click on that, and then it's going to ask you for your article's title as well as the abstract, which I have already filled in here. So then after you have filled in the required information, you're going to click on Find Journals. So when you click on that, it's going to automatically generate keywords from the title as well as the abstract. And then it's going to match these keywords with the journals that this search engine see they are more fit for your article or for your manuscript. So you can see here the match score. So the higher the match score, the closer the number to 1, meaning that this journal actually a lot matches this journal's scope and aim. Well, you can also notice here that there is the open access icon. So this means that this journal is fully open access. That is requiring a fee for publication. If you don't wish to publish in an open access journal and you don't have enough funds to publish your work in an open access journal, then you can keep scrolling down until you don't see this open access icon. So if you are interested in this journal, for example, because it has a high match score, you can simply click on View Profile page. And here you can see more information about the journal, its language, and when it was started. And then you can see a link to visit the journal's website and learn more about it. And then you can also see the journal's impact factor and which other databases the journal is included in. So now we're going to move to the next journal search engines, which is the Journal Finder by Elsevier. Again, it's going to ask you for the title and the abstract. These are the required fields. But then you can also optionally add the keywords and the field of research if you want to refine your search even more. However, I'm going to just keep them blank, and then I'm going to click on Find Journals. You can see here that you can filter your results. If you don't wish, again, to see open access journals, you can switch this off and keep the subscription button on. This means that these journals can publish your work for free without a fee. And you can also filter based on the time to first decision. If you want a journal that is quite fast, or if it doesn't matter with you, then you can keep this as is. The site score is basically the impact factor of the Scopus database, whereas the impact factor is the impact factor of the Web of Science database. So you can see that it gave me 39 journals, and you can see here the match score. So the more the rectangles that are filled, meaning that this journal actually matches my manuscript much more than journals with less filled rectangles, as you can see here. And then you can again notice that there is the open access and the subscription buttons. Again, it depends if you want to submit your work to a hybrid journal and get your work published for free, or if you don't mind and you have enough funds to pay for the open access fees. So you can see here the site score, which is again the impact factor of the Scopus database. The impact factor, which is the factor generated from the Web of Science database, the acceptance rate, and again, the higher the acceptance rate, meaning that there is a higher probability that your work will be accepted, and then the time to the first editorial decision. If time matters to you, then you may want to look for a journal with the shortest amount of time, but if this doesn't matter to you, you can simply ignore this number. And then the time to publication, the time from the time you submit your manuscript until the time the article is fully published. Let's say if you are interested in this journal, you can see here the article processing charges. to see how much you would have to pay if your manuscript gets accepted. You can see the subject areas, sample of the recent articles, as well as the journal scope. If you are interested in this journal, you can simply click on journal website to visit the journal's website and read more and learn more about it. Moving to the next search engines, which is the Springer Nature Journal Suggester. Again, it's going to ask for the title and the abstract. It's asked for the manuscript text, but I usually just put in the abstract just like with the other search engines. Here you can select the subject area, again, if you want to refine your results. And then you're going to click on Suggest Journals. And then it's going to give you the results. Again, it's going to show you the impact factor, the time to the first decision, and the percentage of acceptance rate if the data are available. Again, you can see here the icons for the open access and subscription, meaning that this journal is a hybrid journal. So you can publish your work for free if you don't want to pay an open access fees. Now, the last search engine we have is the Wiley Journal Finder. Again, it's going to ask for the title and the abstract, and then you can click on Find. Then it's going to give you the results. Again, you can see the degree of relevance, the journal's impact factor, and whether or not it's a hybrid journal or if it's a fully open access journal. So if you see the word yes, this means that the journal is fully open access, requiring fee for publication. But if you see optional, this means it's a hybrid journal. You can get your manuscript published for free if it gets accepted in this journal. And if you're interested in this journal, you can simply click on the journal's title or on this title. On this will takes you immediately to the submission site. But if you want to read and learn more about the journal, you can simply click on the journal's title right in here. So after you have selected the journal and you have read all the information that you needed, the aim and scope, the instructions for authors, and you learned about the indexing of the journal and so forth, once you have decided to submit your manuscript and you submit your work, there are certain items that have to be submitted other than just your abstract, other than your manuscript. First of which is the cover letter. So the cover letter can be mandatory by many journals. However, some journals, they have it optional. And if it's optional, I actually strongly encourage you to include a cover letter with your submission, because in the cover letter, which you are going to address to the editor-in-chief, is you're going to describe briefly your study and try to convince the editor of your work and that your work is important, it's relevant to the journal's aim and scope, and that it's going to provide new findings. You're also going to certify that there are no conflict of interest and that the manuscript has not been published elsewhere. You can also mention why you have specifically selected this journal. So this is a sample of a cover letter that I have submitted, and you can see here that it was addressed to the editor-in-chief, and then I mentioned here briefly described my study and why I have selected this journal specifically. Next, we have the manuscript file, which should contain all the text for all the way from the title page to the references and the tables. Again, you have to refer to the journal's style. Some journals require a separate title page because some of them operate double blinding peer review, so they don't want you to include all the author's information in the main manuscript file. Next is the figures. The figures should not be included or embedded in the manuscript files. They have to be separate. Make sure that you upload them in the file formats permitted by the journal. So some journals, they do not accept JPEG, so you have to double check of that. Some of them, they do accept JPEG. Some of them accept that you upload the figures as PDF files. So you have to double check the type of formats for all the images or the figures that you want to include in your submission. Lastly is the conflict of interest form. Some journals, but not all of them, they require that you upload a conflict of interest form, either a form that is offered or made available by the journal, or there is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, a form that they ask you to fill for each of the authors. Otherwise, some journals, they just tell you to include a declaration statement at the end of the manuscript after the conclusion that there is no conflict of interest. So some final advice before we close. If you are new in in research, look for experienced researchers to help you with the research, obviously, with writing your manuscript, preparing the submission packet, as well as help you with writing the cover letter and submitting your manuscript and selecting the right journal. Don't be shy to ask for help in statistics. This is something that I always tell my students and residents, is never be shy to help for statistics. It's definitely a complicated area, so try to ask a statistician or an expert in statistics. Always try to double space the manuscript. This makes it easier for the reviewers to follow and read your manuscript and evaluate it. I always also recommend that you number the lines of your manuscript. Use the line numbering function in Word. You go to layout, and then there is line numbering and select continues. This makes it much easier for the reviewers to make comments by specifying the line or the lines where they want to where they pointed out an issue that they want you to address. In the acknowledgement section, you can also mention if the paper was presented at any conference. So you may want to acknowledge if you have presented it at a local or a national conference. You can actually mention that in the acknowledgement section. Also try to make use of the Academic Writing Center at your institution. Since I'm at King Abdulaziz University, I'm actually suggesting the English Language Institute Academic Writing Center. So this is an example of an academic writing center. But if your institution have an academic writing center, you can actually make use of that to improve your writing, because oftentimes non-native English speakers and researchers, many times they actually encounter a comment that the manuscript requires English editing. So you may want to make use of an academic writing center or some of the websites that offer academic writing help, such as Scribendi. So with that, I conclude my presentation. And as you can see here, it's definitely not an easy journey, but it's definitely fruitful and definitely worth going through to get your manuscript published. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I welcome any questions that you may have using my email or also on Twitter. And thank you again for your attention, and I wish you all the best of luck in publishing your work.